The town lay in the hush of twilight, its boardwalks emptying as lanterns were lit one by one, their glow flickering against warped wooden walls. Dust lingered in the air, stirred by the last wagons rolling toward home. The evening wind carried the smell of wood smoke, horse sweat, and a faint trace of sorrow that seemed to cling to the streets like a ghost. At the edge of a leaning porch, Eleanor May sat collapsed against the step, her breath ragged, her cheeks swollen and purpled. Her 3 little girls clung to her, wide-eyed and trembling, their small hands patting her sleeves as though their touch could mend what cruelty had torn apart. The oldest, no more than 7, tried to be brave, standing with chin lifted though her lip quivered. The middle child pressed a ragged doll against her mother's ribs, whispering comfort that faltered like a song half forgotten. The youngest buried her face into the folds of Eleanor's dress, sobbing quietly, her curls damp with tears. The scene should have been met with compassion, but the town did not rush to her side. Doors creaked open, faces appeared in windows, and whispers floated through the cooling air. One voice hissed, "Clayton Hartwell's gone at her again." Another muttered, "Can't give him sons, what good is she?" The words cut sharper than the blows, a chorus of judgment that cloaked her shame. Eleanor did not lift her head. She knew their eyes, their verdicts, their refusal to see her daughters as blessings. They were born into condemnation not of their making, and she bore the weight of it for them. The sound of spurred boots came slow from the road, measured steps that did not hurry nor falter. A tall figure led a weary horse, its reins loose in his hand. His hat brim shadowed his face, but his eyes, when the lantern light caught them, were steady and gray as weathered stone. Silas Boone had drifted into town with little notice weeks earlier, the kind of man who carried his silence like armor. Folks said he had lost a family long ago, though none knew the details. He spoke to no one unless spoken to, his life pared down to quiet endurance. Yet when his gaze fell upon Eleanor and her daughters huddled on the steps, something within him seemed to shift, as if a long-forgotten ache had been stirred awake. He did not approach with fanfare or righteous anger. He came as though the air itself had drawn him forward, calm and deliberate. He slipped the canteen from his saddlebag, knelt so that the children could reach, and offered it first to the oldest girl. She hesitated, glancing at her mother, then reached with trembling fingers. Cool water spilled down her chin as she drank too quickly. The second child followed, then the youngest, who clutched the canteen with both hands as though it were salvation itself. Silas did not speak until Eleanor lifted her face enough to meet his eyes, shame pulling her features taut. His voice, when it came, was quiet but firm, as though he spoke not only to her but to the hollow night. "You hold on tighter than most men I've seen." The words caught her off guard, carrying no pity, no judgment, only recognition. For a moment, she nearly believed she was more than her husband's curse, more than the town's whispered disgrace. But the echo of Clayton's voice, the memory of his rage, coiled around her heart and pulled her gaze back to the dust. She said nothing, clutching her daughters as if silence itself could shield them. Silas lingered a moment longer, then rose without forcing her to answer. He led his horse to the hitching post, his quiet presence a steady weight in the darkening street. The whispers grew louder that week. Mrs. Abernathy, who never missed a chance to stitch another's pain into gossip, muttered to her neighbors, "That drifter's taken a shine to poor Eleanor May. Mark my words, no good will come of it." The others nodded, some with curiosity, some with contempt. Their judgments circled Eleanor like vultures, each word reminding her that she was seen only as broken, as burden, as less. Yet each time she stepped outside to gather water or hang washing, she found signs of Silas's quiet defiance against her despair. A small bundle of firewood stacked neatly by her door. A handful of wildflowers left on the fence, their petals bright against the gray dust. She never saw him place them, but she knew his hand in the gestures, steady as the rhythm of the wind. Her daughters began to notice him too. The eldest watched for him with guarded eyes, as though weighing whether he might be trusted. The middle child waved shyly when he passed, hiding behind her mother's skirt afterward. The youngest, unburdened by the memory of loss, toddled toward him once in the street, reaching her arms upward. Silas bent slowly, lifted her with care, and set her upon the saddle of his horse. The girl squealed with delight, the sound ringing bright against the somber air. Eleanor's heart clenched at the sight, torn between gratitude and fear of what kindness might cost. Clayton, meanwhile, had not lessened in cruelty. Each drink deepened his fury, each passing day sharpened his bitterness. He accused Eleanor of dishonoring him, of filling his home with weakness instead of strength. His fists did not rest, and when they struck before the watchful eyes of children who could not understand why their laughter brought only wrath. That night, after the last blow left her gasping against the wall, Eleanor staggered outside into the moonlight. Her girls followed, clutching one another. The cold air wrapped around her torn dress, and the stars above seemed indifferent, their brilliance unsoftened by the suffering below. From the shadows, Silas emerged, his figure outlined against the pale glow. He did not rush to her, did not speak loudly enough for the town to hear. He simply stepped close, his voice low, roughened by dust yet gentle as the wind that bends prairie grass. "Come with me, lady. You and your girls don't belong in the dust of his boots." The words hung between them, fragile and immense, carrying the weight of a choice she had never dared to believe possible. Her breath caught, her fingers tightening around her daughter's hands. She looked into his eyes, searching for demand, for pity, for deception, and found none. Only steadiness, like the earth itself offering her ground to stand upon. Yet fear pressed hard upon her chest, fear of leaving, fear of staying, fear of the unknown paths that stretched beyond this night. She could not answer, not yet. Silence was the only refuge she knew. The lantern by the door sputtered, flame bending in the wind, shadows reaching long across the yard. Eleanor held her daughters close, her gaze locked on the man who had offered her a way out. Hope flickered within her, faint as the lantern's flame, trembling but unextinguished. And there, with the town asleep and the stars cold above, the night ended, not with decision, but with the breathless pause before it. The days that followed bent beneath a strange tension, a silence that pressed heavier than spoken words. Eleanor May lingered between fear and fragile hope, her daughters never straying far from her skirts, as though they sensed the ground beneath their mother's world was shifting. Silas Boone remained near but not intrusive. He kept to the edges of her life, working his horse at the edge of town, repairing tack by the stable, or pausing at the well when she came to draw water. He did not repeat his offer, though she felt it echoing in the hollow of her chest with each breath she drew. The children were the first to soften the silence. One afternoon, the middle daughter pressed her rag doll into Silas's rough hand and whispered, "Keep her safe." He accepted it without hesitation, holding the worn toy with a gentleness that startled Eleanor. Her eldest, cautious as a sentinel, studied the cowboy from the shadows, testing his patience with long silences and wary glances. And the youngest, unburdened by memory, would toddle toward him with arms raised whenever he appeared, confident that he would catch her before she stumbled. Each gesture chipped away at the fortress of Eleanor's fear, though she scarcely admitted it even to herself. Clayton Hartwell's presence grew darker as he sensed her shifting spirit. His eyes narrowed, his voice sharpened, his hands quicker to strike. The whispers of the town had reached him, rumors of the drifter's shadow near his wife and daughters. Pride twisted with rage until he became a storm in boots and broad shoulders. One evening, in the presence of half the town, he dragged Eleanor by her arm into the street, his voice booming with accusation. "You shame me before my neighbors," he roared. "You and those girls you cursed this house with." His words echoed against the buildings, drawing faces from windows and shadows from alleys. Silas did not rush to meet the fury. He stepped forward slowly, his stance quiet but unyielding. His eyes fixed on Clayton with a calm that burned sharper than defiance. He placed himself between the raging husband and the trembling woman, his body a shield without weapon, his silence a rebuke more powerful than shouted threats. The crowd hushed, watching, the balance of shame beginning to shift. For once, it was Clayton exposed, his cruelty laid bare beneath the scrutiny of his neighbors. Eleanor, though trembling, lifted her chin slightly, the smallest spark of resistance glinting in her eyes. That night she sat with her daughters in the dim glow of a single lantern. Her cheek bore fresh bruises, but her voice carried a strength unfamiliar to her ears. She whispered to them, "We are not curses. We are light. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." The girls nestled close, their mother's words wrapping around them like a fragile but unbreakable shield. Something had cracked open inside Eleanor, a recognition that her worth did not rest in the cruelty of her husband or the judgment of neighbors. Silas's presence grew steadier after that night. He did not intrude but remained a quiet guardian at the edges of her days. At dawn, he mended her broken porch rail, his calloused hands steady as he hammered the nails. He refused her attempt to thank him, only nodding once before returning to his horse. The children followed him with their eyes, their trust settling into something deeper. Eleanor began to notice more than his silence. She noticed the way he regarded her daughters as treasures, not burdens. He lifted the youngest onto his saddle with care, guided the middle child's small hand over the reins, and spoke to the eldest with a respect that made her shoulders straighten with pride. Each small act was a stone laid in a bridge between despair and hope, and Eleanor found herself standing upon it before she realized it had formed. But storms gather when skies seem most tender. Clayton returned one final night, drunk and desperate, a rifle clutched in his hand. His voice thundered across the yard as he shouted that he would take the girls away, that no woman who bore only daughters deserved the dignity of home. The words chilled Eleanor's blood, but she did not retreat. Silas stood before the cabin, unarmed, his shoulders squared, his hat shadowing his gaze. The stillness of his stance carried a weight more formidable than steel. He did not need to brandish weapons. His presence alone was defiance. Clayton's eyes blazed as he leveled his fury at them both, but before he could advance, Eleanor stepped forward. Her heart hammered, but her voice rose clear into the night air. "You will not touch them. Not again. Not ever." The words cut through the silence, firm and unshaking, born from a strength she had long buried but never lost. The townsfolk, drawn by the commotion, gathered in the street. They watched, not with whispers this time, but with eyes that bore witness to a woman who had found her voice. Clayton faltered under the weight of her gaze and the stillness of the cowboy who stood beside her. The rifle lowered slightly, his bluster unraveling as he realized the crowd was no longer nodding in silent agreement but staring with condemnation. Shame spread across his features, and for the first time, it was not Eleanor who bent beneath its weight. Staggering backward, he muttered curses and disappeared into the shadows, his power broken not by fists but by dignity. Eleanor remained standing, her daughters pressed close to her skirts, her chest heaving with the remnants of fear and triumph. Silas tipped his hat lightly, as though acknowledging not his own role but hers. He had offered his steadiness, but it was she who had spoken, she who had stood, she who had claimed her daughters as blessings in the face of wrath. In that moment, she understood that strength was not in silence or endurance but in the choice to rise. The following morning, when the sky blushed with dawn, Eleanor gathered her daughters at the fence. Silas was saddling his horse, his movements deliberate, his gaze distant as though readying to ride on alone. She stepped forward, her hand trembling yet sure, and placed it upon his arm. "We'll come," she whispered. He looked at her then, gray eyes softening, though no smile curved his mouth. He only nodded once, steady as always, and reached for the reins. The four of them mounted, the girls pressed close against their mother as Silas guided the horse toward the open road. Dust rose beneath the hooves, curling like smoke in the fresh light. Behind them lay the house of shadows, the streets of whispers, the weight of chains she had carried too long. Before them stretched the horizon, uncertain but alive, the promise of freedom blooming with every mile. As they rode, the narrator's voice seemed to murmur from the wind itself. In a land where women were judged by the children they bore and men measured strength in cruelty, a quiet cowboy had shown another kind of courage, the courage of presence, the courage of gentleness. And a woman, once beaten down, had discovered that her worth was never his to define. Remember this, dear soul. Sometimes the bravest thing is not to fight with fists but to stand with dignity, to walk away from the shadows, to ride toward the light though your hands still tremble. The road stretched endless before them, and though their journey had only begun, the choice had been made.